Welcome on in to episode 3 of our podcast. This one is all about Final Fantasy IX, and we're celebrating its 20th anniversary. Yay! So tonight we have LadyBuggy, Nessrocker and Tomatoborris. So can each of you please introduce yourselves and your love and passion for Final Fantasy IX, starting with Buggy.
Oh, okay. I was like, oh, well, I'm LadyBuggy. Hello. I'm a JRPG variety streamer. I do lots of stuff, but Final Fantasy IX is my favorite game of all time. So I started playing it when I was like 6 or 7. Yeah, all time. I know it's kind of, yeah, I'm not good at ranking things, but Final Fantasy IX is definitely number 1 for me. So I started playing it when I was a kid. So the nostalgia is like there. It's extreme. And I think that's why it's my number 1. So,
oh, that's a great story. Ness, what about you?
Hi, I'm Nessrocker. I am a person. I don't do much on the internet, but I thoroughly enjoy Final Fantasy IX. It's probably my favorite of the Final Fantasy IX or Final Fantasy games. Followed closely by 6, but I don't know. There's just a certain charm about this game.
Okay, and Tomato, our regular.
Hi, I'm Tomatoborris. I play mainly RPGs on Twitch, and I also pester H-Bomb on her podcast every month. I'd say I'm a long-time fan of Final Fantasy, and 9 is my favourite of the series.
Why?
So, well, similar to LadyBuggy, it's one I played, I think, first when I was 10 or 11, and off the back of like all of the earlier ones, and it still stands out as my favorite, which I guess we'll go into in the podcast.
Oh, nice segue. Buggy, so you are actually currently playing through Final Fantasy IX on your stream. What do you think makes the game still playable today?
I think I'm always playing Final Fantasy IX. But I think it's the characters. Like, it's the character arcs and the ability to relate to these characters, and the creators made it that way. Like, they really made it like a game where you can really connect to them, and I think that's just kind of the main thing. Also, the theme is so different too. Like, I know it's like medieval, but there's a lot of like theater aspects in it, and like a lot of really interesting references that a lot of people tend to like connect to. So I think it's just like a huge giant present wrapped in a bow. And like, it's just, there's no, you know what I mean? It's just so, I don't know, it's timeless to me. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. It does seem quite timeless. Right, okay, so my next question is actually for all of you, right from the off. So I'll point in it in various directions. Which is your favorite character within Final Fantasy IX? Let's start with Ness.
Oh, absolutely. My favorite character, which should be no secret to anyone I've watched stream Final Fantasy IX, is Freya. She's just such a bad-ass kind of person, and she's a really strong, and this is what kind of really struck me as I got older and realized, apart from playing it as a child, but she is a really cool female character who is not sexualized at all in the in her game. And in addition to that, I really empathize with her story. The idea that someone who could be such a big part of your life, hold a big space in your heart, just completely does not know who you are. That's kind of like a living death. And I don't know. I've felt that occasionally, losing somebody, and then maybe that relationship only existed in your memory now.
And Tomato, your favorite character?
Well, it's probably most people's favorite character, I imagine, in the form of Vivi. He obviously has one of the saddest but also most like beautiful story arcs in, I'd say, any Final Fantasy game, let alone 9. And you see him grow so much like throughout the game, and it's an interesting one. Is Zidane is considered the protagonist. You can also very easily look at the game and see because the second main character who's introduced is Vivi. It's very easy to view the entire plot from Vivi's eyes, and that's very prominent to me. And yeah, he's always stuck out as the best.
And Buggy?
I think when I was like, it kind of like it shifts for me every once in a while because they're all so good. But when I was a kid, I loved Beatrix. Like, she's my favorite. It's kind of sad for me. I feel like she deserved a little bit more, like, story wise. But I think right now I'm really digging on Quina. I love Quina so much.
Yeah.
Like, Quina is great. I think the reason why I love Quina is because Quina doesn't really have too much backstory, but is just so, like, such a wonderful, interesting character. And just Quina is best. I don't know. It's so much fun too. The blue magic in 9, she makes blue magic so good in 9. And I don't know. But I'm digging on Quina right now.
That's cool. I mean, I personally, I've always gone for Vivi, but I do also like Quina because of the fact that even 20 years ago they had a character that was like a they-them. It has no gender. I mean, that's 20 years ago. That's amazing. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that one. Next question is for Ness. One of the more immersive elements of Final Fantasy is being able to follow individual NPC's story throughout the games. For example, part-time worker Mary. I was a big fan of that one when I did a playthrough a few months ago. What side stories and NPCs stand out to you in 9 and why?
Well, I mean, I can't discount part-time worker Mary. Obviously, she's kind of really the hero of the entire story. If you ask someone, I'm sure. But I know this is kind of a cop-out, but I want to say Senna, and just in general, the whole Tantalus crew, because you get so many of these ATEs where you see them actually like going through their own adventure, and it makes great impacts in the story. And Senna's kind of like an unsung hero, in my opinion, because, you know, not only do you get like these little cool key items that reference him, like the coffee he makes at the gate, but he provides one of the potions that changes Sid from an Oglop into a frog. Although that didn't work out, you know, he still has that part. And then you've got people like Blank, who gets petrified in the forest, and then Marcus actually literally joins your other team at one point and helps you out for a good portion of the game. Like, and of course Baku is terribly iconic, and it has his own great personality. They're just so great. But yeah, I guess Senna, if I had to name one, and I just love that little goblin-faced man.
The next question I have is for Buggy, which is about the ATE, the active time events, which you could mostly skip, but sometimes they actually had ones that they forced you to watch. Did you like this addition to the game and feel it could have been continued within the Final Fantasy franchise? What did you think it brought to the story? Did it help with the character development, do you think?
I think at the time it really did. I think at the time they were trying to, like, Ito and Sakaguchi, they were trying to like create this like different experience, like more of a cinematic experience, and they were trying to figure out a way to really like take these characters and dive deeper into them, because they felt that in 7 and 8, the way that they just created it didn't really do that as much as they wanted to in their next game. So that's why they kind of did it. And I agree. I like it a lot. I love it, you know, because you have the ability to skip through it. You don't have to see it. You know, I like options. Options are always good. But I think it was a good stepping point into them understanding what their audience wanted, essentially. Like, and I think active time events are great. And I personally love them. A lot of people don't. Like, a lot of people are like, whatever, I don't really care. I just want to get on through the story and I don't care about the side stuff. But I think it adds to so much charm. And like, the fact that you can like click onto an active time event and you can watch these side stories and learn potentially more about your favorite characters, I think is really interesting. So I don't know. I thought it was just ingenuity at its finest. They were trying something new and I liked it. I don't know. I liked it a lot.
Yeah, I really liked it as a thing, and I was wondering what made them not think to bring it into any more Final Fantasies. It's just, I don't think any of the Final Fantasies since have done anything similar, maybe. Does anyone think any have done similar
No,
things?
not really. No, not really.
None that I can think of, but I think a lot going forward from that had a lot more cutscenes where the characters were not present. That may have been influenced by that.
Okay. Ness, we will be going back to you again, actually. The last Final Fantasy... This was the last Final Fantasy released on PlayStation 1, and it was developed as a reflection on earlier Final Fantasies. What elements of this game do you think could have alienated the Final Fantasy fans of 7 and 8, considering that this was quite sort of... You know, it was going back. It was old school sort of fantasy style, whereas 7 and 8 were more realism in comparison.
So I really like this question, honestly. I think there are two big things that alienated the influx of fans that came from Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VIII. And the biggest obvious one is the aesthetics, because it's just completely different aesthetically from the kind of futuristic type feel of Final Fantasy VII and VIII. And I know I had many debates with me and my friends, like, oh, it's a kid's game, the graphics are so simplistic, and it's like, no, you don't get it. But and I'm not sure, I really don't know, because I've not really seen anything about it, if that's more of a Western audience thing versus, you know, like Japanese, because I know that one of the big reasons they made Final Fantasy IX the way they did is because an outpouring of Japanese fans being like, this isn't traditional Final Fantasy. So I think that would be interesting to look into. It's just the NumRad references to past games, because, you know, this has just so many, and a lot of the new fans came in from 7 and 8. You know, that was kind of a resurgence in popularity, especially in the West. Yeah, there's just so many, like, just little things like key items or even spells and abilities to monsters that are just references to older Final Fantasy games that came before them, and that could be an alienating factor.
Okay, yeah, I guess that's true. Could be. So, Tomato, you believe Final Fantasy IX is a homage to previous Final Fantasy games. Sort of hitting back on that previous question. What is it that they have in common, and are there any elements from 9 that you feel are missing in the newer titles? So, kind of on what Ness was saying, with what are these things that were in the earlier Final Fantasies that are in this 9? What's the homage part?
Well, apart from, as Ness was saying, like the items, the sort of cameos, and the callbacks. I think most of all the high traditional fantasy setting, and one of the things in particular was all of the characters. It feels a bit like a fusion there of two styles that Final Fantasy's kind of dance between up until that point. One style being like kind of pretty nameless, personalityless characters, but you can assign them your own class, and it feels a bit more personal, like in Final Fantasy 1, 3, and 5. And then there's the other end where it's a bit more unique characters, which sort of alternatively went to 4 and 6. A lot of the people I think off the back of 7 and 8 would have had that experience of like a lot of freedom with their characters. And 9 does a very good job of like bringing each of those unique characters, as well as the traditional Final Fantasy archetypes of, say, like Thief, Dragoon, Mage, Black Mage, White Mage. It sort of merges them all together into one big cooking pot, which, yeah, I don't think anything like it's been quite produced. Stylistically, from 10 onwards, I think some stuff in 11's a very homage-y, in the online games is very homage-y, but there is definitely a an aesthetic change in style going forward from 9 onwards that's completely missing, I'd say.
Yeah. Okay. And this one went back. You had mentioned classes there. This one went backwards from its previous 7 and 8 in that it forced you into the character classes again. At the time of release, do you think this was well received, and does it age well because of that?
I definitely remember friends of mine being off-put by that at the time, because they really, really liked the freedom of 7 and 8's materia and junction systems, because they could just pick their favourite characters and go. And it really depends on your playstyle. I personally really enjoyed it from the perspective that I not only enjoy the archetypes that you're strong-armed into, but I also enjoy all of the characters for their personalities. So I could craft any party myself. But I definitely think the Western audience might have been a bit more off-put by that, because, well, as we've mentioned, it was after a huge surge in fandom from 7 and 8. And, yeah, they might have felt a bit stifled.
As Zessel's just said in chat, it brought back the fantasy to Final Fantasy. So, Ness, we're introduced to many bad guys in this game, starting with Braum, leading on to Kuja. Do we see patterns like this in other Final Fantasies, or is this the first one to lead us on a trail of boss fights that we never saw coming? I mean, it goes on, doesn't it? We've got Braum, Kuja, Garland, Necron, is it?
Necron, yeah. Yeah, and it's definitely not the first Final Fantasy game to do this. I mean, you can look at Final Fantasy VI and you know, the Emperor was the big bad for the majority of the game until he gets offed, and then it's clear, oh yeah, Kuja was hinted at before, but now you realize, yeah, he's kind of a bad guy. But I think, not to talk bad amongst my fellow friends of the series, but I think this one does it the worst. It's definitely definitely in reference to Garland. He is set up a little bit, and you know, he is like this creator, but then at kind of the last minute, he's like, oh, he's gone. And then Kuja's the big bad, and you're like, yeah, it's been building up to this. And then he's gone, and then it's like this boss that's completely out of left field, and it's a huge disconnect. And you're like, wait, who is this guy? Did I miss something? Did I forget to do side quests? And it's not the first time in a Final Fantasy game that's done this. Final Fantasy III had done this before. There is a boss after the quote-unquote big boss that is just thrown right in there. But I have to say, that was many, many years ago. And you kind of entered this new era of storytelling, you know, and they've had so much experience with this. It just, I'm not sure if they were going for an homage here or if it was just last minute, we need somebody else. Because actually, if you didn't realize this, Hades, the optional boss, was supposed to be the last boss in Final Fantasy IX originally, but they changed it.
Do you know why they changed?
You would have to as somebody who worked on it. It's not been revealed as far as I know.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that one at all. Buggy, throughout a lot of the main storyline, you're forced to play with certain characters, creating more diversity when fighting because of that previous classes part that we were just discussing. Did you like this aspect of the game, and did it make you change your combat choices in any way? Sometimes you wouldn't have the healer. That was my problem.
Yeah, so like I think it kind of makes you think a little bit, because like, you know, we're used to using like white mage or something like that, or we're used to using like summoners or whatever. But like with Quina, you can just like White Wind, Mighty Guard with Quina, or you can use like Freya can even heal too. Like you can start using, I don't know, you can use your imagination and really kind of break through, and reasons why I love Quina right now. You can really like break through and like start improvising and stuff like that. And I think it makes it a lot of fun. It makes it a lot of fun.
Yeah, do you feel like any of the more later Final Fantasies should have, I don't know if they really took that on. Are there any other Final Fantasies
that sort of have that? I believe so. I think all of them are so vastly different. I mean, if we're talking about 10 and stuff like that, you can also argue that 10 they also did that too. I mean, with like Riku and like different characters and stuff like that. So I think they really started with 9. 9 is really like an interesting game because I feel like they decided to experiment with it so much, and it really was kind of like the jumping off point for a lot of different like later games. But yeah, I mean, like you could argue that there is stuff in the later games that is like that too. But every Final Fantasy is just so vastly different and interesting. But I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. Ness, out of all of the Final Fantasy ways of gaining abilities, how do you feel about 9's management of learning abilities from purchasing weapons? What were the positives and negatives in setting it this way?
So I could go on and on about the system from Final Fantasy IX because it is probably my absolute favorite. A lot of people talk about Final Fantasy VII as you know, the materia system, and it was very interesting, very different. But in Final Fantasy IX, I just think they got a lot of things right. Like, not you're talking about the positives. One of the positives is you get a new piece of equipment. And not only does it power up just your raw stats, but you automatically get that ability, and you can start working your way to learning it permanently, but you can use it immediately. So like you got a boss fight coming up, you don't have this ability, slap these boots on. Now you can float, and I just think that's a really cool way of integrating not only equipment but abilities. Unfortunately. The biggest drawback, in my opinion, is that if you miss a limited, or maybe you won't get it in a long time item, you're not only out, that good sword or that good armor for a long time or maybe forever, but you're also out those abilities. You could also argue that it doesn't give you enough time to learn the ability permanent before you get an upgrade, to which I say, grind more, noob.
Wrecked.
Ness, on that, do you think that Final Fantasy VII Remake has kind of used Final Fantasy IX's weapon ability structure? Because it does have that.
I do think that a lot, and you think about that versus classic Final Fantasy VII. If you missed a piece of equipment, or you missed a weapon, or you couldn't afford it even, you're not out a whole lot. Like, the biggest part of that game in gaining abilities and even stats for a lot is materia. And as long as you had that materia, you could slot it into weapons or armor. It didn't really matter. It was, and that's kind of the idea behind the game decisions in that game as well, for both games, is that you can do anything on anyone, right?
Yeah.
I would like to touch on, speaking of abilities, the limit breaks for Final Fantasy IX.
Yeah.
I hate them. I hate the way they implemented them. You look at someone like Quina, who's Lady's favorite, and 90% of the time you get it at the worst time possible. You're fighting a boss, and of course you can't eat them, or you're fighting random enemies that you just don't care about eating, or maybe you've already got their powers. And it just, I know a lot of speedrunners, like Tomatoes mentioned previously, that they plan out their limit breaks to happen, or trances, as it were, to happen at certain times. But it just didn't feel good as a player, in my opinion.
No, I fully agree on that, actually. There were regular times when I played it that the trance would just happen, and it was the absolute worst point. And then I didn't have it for the next big boss fight, but anyway.
But can you imagine, like, how OP Quina would be? Like, if Quina had, like, a really great trance on top of all the things that Quina can learn, and Quina would be, like, overpowered. I mean, I agree. Like, his trance is pretty, like, ridiculous. At the same time, I'm also thinking, like, it could be pretty, like, outrageous. I don't know.
Sorry, we're not trying to come up with solutions. We're just critiquing. That's what we do here.
Oh yeah. I'm just. That's what I'm thinking. That's
just feeling the radiation of love for Quina right now.
Oh yeah, no,
Which
I'm
you love.
not. No, I'm just thinking how OP it would be if he had like a crazy ass, you know. But yeah.
Yeah. Now on to the toughest boss in Final Fantasy IX, Tomato. Which one in your eyes is the toughest boss, and how would you go about defeating them?
I guess the classic one that's considered the most tough boss in 9 would be Ozma. As far as the optional bosses go, you could actually give good credit to both Necron and Hades, though. Necron actually putting up pretty similar fight to the others. If you don't have good status protection, for example, you will be wasted quite quickly. Ozma, however, is all in the prep. There's a few key things that if you know, you can negate a lot of worry there. Little things like his ATB will actually, whenever you perform an action, Ozma's ATB automatically fills and he gets priority in the queue. So that's why people feel he gets a lot more moves than other people, when if you actually input all of your commands whilst he's mid-action, he doesn't get that advantage, and you mitigate, like, potentially, if you've got 4 characters and you enter 4 commands, you could be like quadrupling the amount of attacks he gets. Apart from that, just protect against Holy and spam Freya's Dragon Crest like everything else. Protect against Shadow as well. Yeah, that's the one.
How would you learn, like, before internet days, how would you learn, I guess it was early internet days, that attack, the when to attack thing, and that he would get...
I can answer this one. You buy a strategy guide.
Wasn't it this one that had the play online?
This was the failed play online for the official strategy guide as well. I believe it was actually it's arguably intended for a more hardcore audience than even we were at the age, because obviously I only know that because someone else out there researched this extensively and tested it, because they were trying to figure out the pattern to Ozma's attacks because they wanted to beat him at level 1 or something like that. And they went up and wrote a ridiculous mechanics guide, and that still sits on game FAQs. And you can still go to this day, find these ridiculously in-depth things that tell you precisely how the damage formula for, say, Zidane's Thievery attack works, which is based on successful and unsuccessful steal attempts throughout the game.
Cool. Okay. Let's move on to the next one then. What have I got? Oh, 100% completion. It's another question for Tomato, actually. So, would you ever attempt to 100% complete this? And what would be the hardest achievement to receive?
No, I will never try and 100% this.
I knew you would say that.
I have done... If you arguably remove... I believe... I was trying to do a count in my head before we started. I think it is literally 3 items from the game. If you remove 3 items from the game, it goes from being one of the hardest to 100% to one of the relatively easiest. I'd say even more so, one of those items puts it much more in an impetus, because the Excalibur 2 weapon has a 12-hour limit on obtaining it. You have to reach a certain point in the final dungeon within that time, and you can obtain the strongest sword in the game for Steiner. Because of that limit, the other variously difficult items to get in the game, such as a unique 1 in 256 steal chance from the Golem, and 2 minigame key items in particular that are completely time constrained and incredibly hard to complete. Thanks to those, it's actually next to impossible in my... I know someone out there has done it with meticulous save, lather, rinse, repeat, reset lather, rinse, repeat. But wow, it is genuinely insane. I'd say that 100% playthrough is of the Excalibur 2 is the hardest thing to achieve. If you got 100% treasure hunter rank alongside that, which means you've got all of the other stuff, yeah, that's the difficult bit.
Yeah, I don't know how anybody can go to 100% on this game. Buggy, do you always complete the Mognet side quest for this game, and is it a welcome addition? What do you get for completing it?
I complete it when I'm not drunk, but yeah, so it's fun. I would recommend it. I don't think you really you don't get really too much great stuff from it. You at one point you can get like the Aloha t-shirt, and like you can get a protect ring and all that stuff. It's mostly just for I believe personally it's for having fun when you go and save the game. I like buying from Stiltskin. If you keep buying from Stiltskin, you get lots of cool, interesting things. I think it's definitely worth it. It's just a fun mini game side quest that's just optional, and yeah.
It's got my favorite Moogle in it. I love
Artemission is my favorite, or however you say it. I know the little purple one. He's so cute.
He's adorable.
Yeah.
Ness, I know that you love Chocobo Hot and Cold. Chocobo Hot and Cold is a side quest. I'm sure everyone in chat is well aware of this. It can take a lot of hours to complete, but it brings you the whole range of chocobos that 8 didn't have. So people that would have played 7 before and then got into 8 and they're like, what? Where are the chocobos? And then go into this one. Do you always take on this side quest when you're playing 9? And what important extras do you get for playing it?
So you get a lot of things for playing Chocobo Hot and Cold, and more specifically completing the chocographs, from gear to access to new areas and things like that. I always do at least a little bit of Chocobo Hot and Cold when I play. I don't always 100% complete it because I can't be bothered. But and I have to say the chocographs are my favorite part. I like digging up a chocograph and trying to figure out where that is in the world, or at least I did before I had the entire game memorized in my sleep. But that was my favorite part. I like hunting for those. The actual digging game can be, as you guys know, a little wonky, and it can be a little frustrating at times, especially when you get further and further into it. Like especially the sea area. Oh my god! Once I get to that, I'm pretty much like, yeah, I'm done. I got all I need. The first disc, especially, I think, gives you a real leg up on the types of equipment that you can get, and therefore abilities you can learn. And I think that's the most important part of it, at least when I do my playthroughs.
Okay, cool. Let's move on to card games. So, Buggy, in Final Fantasy VIII, we were introduced to card games, and then 9 has Tetra Master. Do you enjoy the card game in 9 and feel it's integral to the storyline?
I like it.
Okay.
Contrary to popular opinion. I like it. I think it's fun. I think a lot of people don't really understand it as much as 8, and that's okay. But I think it's fun. And it is important to the story because you have to play the card game at some point when you're in Treno. So I guess they make you play the game at some point, and I think it's fun. I personally like it. I think it's a lot of fun. But yeah, I know a lot of people, they prefer to play 8, and when they play Tetra Master, they're like, what? But I like it personally.
Ness and Tomato, I think you two like the game as well, don't you? The card game?
For sure. I do. I think it's a lot better than Final Fantasy VIII's a triple triad. Just for the sheer amount of, in Final Fantasy VIII, the rules can change depending on who you actually want to play a game with, and then it spreads to other regions. Whereas comparison Tetra Master, it's the same game every time. You know what you're getting into, pretty much.
I'd say it is slightly more complicated. If you remove the crazy rule sets from 8, the fundamental base game's a bit more complicated in 9. But when you get into it, that makes it more fun, ultimately, in the end.
Yeah, if you took out the random rules from FF8, I think it would be a more fun game. But the randomness in that they made up for that for in Tetramaster is kind of when two cards attack at each other. It does have a random, depending on their stats, ability to fight.
Yeah, one of my questions actually was for Ness, which was going to ask about it comparing to Triple Triad, and if it's easier or harder, or does it make more or less sense?
I find it easier. I think it makes more sense than Triple Triad. I just could not get into Triple Triad at all in Final Fantasy VIII. But there are those out there who like it. And actually, I think in general, Triple Triad is a more popular version of a card game in Final Fantasy. It's been more supported traditionally through, especially in the Japanese market. They had it, and there's still fan sites for Triple Triad where you can play online, although I think it's in Flash, so I don't know how well that works anymore. But the only time they did do a limited run of Tetramaster in Europe, of all places, with physical cards. So that'd be kind of interesting. I would like to get my hands on those, but I'm sure they're super expensive.
Probably. I don't know. That Square Enix store is pretty good. You might want to check it out. So Tomato likes to play a lot of modded Final Fantasy, and he's recently been playing modded Final Fantasy IX. What do most of these mods center around Tomato, and why do you think they choose those particular things that they mod?
Well, I remember, because I've been following some parts of the modding scene for some time, I remember the most early mods I've seen for 9 were same as the early Game Shark codes that sort of got cracked for it, was how to replace or integrate Beatrix into your party. And there are several different projects that were worked on, but then as obviously Final Fantasy IX gets re-released, you need to sometimes work from the ground up. So Beatrix seems to be the most popular one, though difficulty mods have started to creep out a bit for 9. It is the least modded of the Final Fantasies, I'd say.
All right.
But yeah, there are difficulty mods out there, and there's a very popular graphical overhaul that I actually think made some gamer online magazine headline, which caused a surge in popularity, because you can still buy it on Steam and install this pack, and it redoes a load of the pre-rendered backgrounds to make them fantastically much more pretty, as they deserve, because they are very pretty environments.
Dupes just said in chat, least modded because why mod perfection?
Exactly.
Keeping on the mod conversation, Ness, one of the modded changes is allowing Beatrix to become a playable character more than the original storyline. What do you think made her character so popular that they created this mod?
She's just a badass. But no, more seriously, Square has been really good about doing this thing. And ever since, I would say, first I can remember it is in Chrono Trigger, where they have this person who seems kind of like an antagonist, and then you learn more about them, and the story kind of changes, and then they come over to your side. You see it in Chrono Trigger, like I said. You also see it in Final Fantasy VIII with Cypher, but I think that's one of the big things is, sometimes you want to empathize with these people and realize that they have their own goals and they're not so misaligned with yours. I mean, for the first half of the game, Beatrix is fighting for Braum, but really what she wants to do is protect Princess Garnet and the kingdom as a whole. And that's kind of what brings her to your side. I think more people wanted her, to play her, to try to see her on your side more. And what helps with that is you actually get her as a guest character at one point. Like, I think you see a lot more fans of the modding into Beatrix in your party than you would seeing like the Final Fantasy VII traditional modding Sephiroth in your party. And you get to control him at one point as well, but it doesn't really feel in with the spirit of the game. And I think a lot of people realize that.
It's if I can interject, there's a worthwhile side note. I think, especially in the last mod I played, which included Beatrix, one of their claims was that some of the dialogue they'd given her was actually directly, it's still in the game files. It's just sort of like dummy content that was potentially there. Okay. Whether it was there for testing purposes, whether it was because she was actually a player character or just a larger NPC in the game. So there's, I don't know if fans have picked up on that a bit more, and they've tried to strong armor into the game more because of that. But there's definitely cut dialogue of Beatrix lurking around the game files in scenes where she's not even present, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, because is it just a rumor, or is it more than a rumor that she was going to be a character instead of Amarant, or as well as him?
I've never heard that.
No,
but...
it's just maybe I've made this up in my dreams, guys.
It sounds like the sort of thing that would be revealed, like a side comment in there's that Final Fantasy IX Ultimania. They released it, I think, for the 10th anniversary or something, which contains a load of interviews with the directors and things and backstory and stuff. It sounds like the sort of thing that there might have been a throwaway line from an interviewer that fans might have like bigged up or something like that. But honestly, it could go either way.
That's true. Tomato, do you believe that this game can be cheesed, as you like to say, like a lot of the rest of them? What are your
so easily?
What are your go-to techniques to maximize your characters for battle?
Well, the first trick to anything is knowing that Freya is the best character in the game in terms of damage, utility, maybe. I would also agree Quina as well has that slot, but comes with a caveat in performing that role. So Freya has a move called Dragon Crest in particular, that will increase in damage, and it goes all the way up to 9,999 damage. Costs, I think, 16 MP or something like that, and it increases for every dragon type you kill, which includes the level 5 Serpions you meet on disc 1. So you can quite easily farm that up to 9,999 damage without leveling too much. You can use Steiner's charge attack with a full party of physical attackers, which means you just get 4 free attacks from strong physical attackers. And Quina, obviously the most cheesable thing, because she's in your party right from the bat. She can learn a spell that I believe was mistranslated. It was translated to Limit Glove, and it was originally meant to be Limit Globe. And if Quina is on 1 HP and you perform this move, it also does 9,999 damage, and you can get this ability as soon as you get Quina, and she's present for most of disc 1 and 2, and can be for 3 and 4. So there. How to cheese Final Fantasy IX.
I hope everyone took notes if they want to do that in future. In a recent article, the original developers said that they would love to have the chance to continue this story. Would you be accepting of a Final Fantasy IX 2? And how do you think that they could expand on the original story? The original was asking about the meaning of life. Where do you think this could go? And this question is for all of you. So whoever feels like, should I pick on one of you?
I was just going to give a shout out maybe to that article I linked you, H-Bomb, where they do, in fact, they ask each of the original sort of, I think it's the director, the producer, and the lead writer, and they ask what sort of like, was there anything you felt you could have expanded upon more? And when I first sort of thought of this question, it felt very like, honestly, I don't think it's got a very happily ever after ending outside of the otherwise sad parts of the ending. I wouldn't personally see much need to make a sequel, but based on their answers, they did raise some interesting things, like they were going to focus on, I think, Zidane and Garnett's difference in like stature as like noble versus thief, or nobility thief kind of thing. I believe they mentioned specifically a segment in Trino where the Trino nobles would highly disapprove of the concept of the two of them kind of thing, and they were going to go into some of that depth maybe. Based on that sort of stuff, it does make me feel, yeah, there is actually room for more. But what could make an interesting story from, I don't know, you'd need a new big bad for sure.
I would love to see a Final Fantasy IX 2, just because I want to spend more time with everyone in that world. I have no idea how it would work story-wise, honestly. I think really the only way you would be able to do it is do like a Final Fantasy -9 -2, where it is kind of a prequel before the events of the game happen. Maybe you could focus on like the Tantalus group and what they got up to before they decided to kidnap the princess, or see some of, Zidane's backstory. Obviously, Aiko could not be in it, but
that's a really nice idea. I like that. Buggy, do you have any thoughts?
I want to see what happens to the little VVs.
it's true.
I want to see what happens. I want to see what everybody thinks about it. Like what everybody's opinion on, like the world opinion on black mages and where they're at. And like, there's a lot that you can jump off from. Like there's a big jumping off point. Human
black mage negotiations of yeah.
Also, speaking of side story NPCs, shout out to the black mages. That's some of the best kind of ATEs there.
Which one's your favorite? 243, Mr. 243. What a guy.
Well, he has such a commanding presence.
So memorable.
Is there anything to the story, the actual Final Fantasy IX story, that you would have changed at all? And that goes to everybody and everyone as well.
So there wouldn't be much to the story that I would change personally. I would, if I could do anything with Final Fantasy IX, it's give them more time to develop it. Because you got to think, Final Fantasy IX came out 17 months after Final Fantasy VIII. And yeah, they were working on it while they were still working on Final Fantasy VIII, but I think a lot more time dedicated to it would help it a lot. If I had to change anything about the story, cut Amaranth, give more story to Quinn.
I was honestly going to say, when I first played this as a kid, I actually, as much as I loved it, I was actually, I had this a bit with Final Fantasy VIII as well, coming off the back of 7, where you're presented with 3 or 4 discs and your mind is blown. The second you get out of Midgar, you've got a huge world map and it keeps going. And then you finally get to disc 2. In 8 and 9, I definitely had a realization of how they fit things on the disc with FM movies and things like that. And if you look at it on paper, each of 9's sort of discs are actually, they feel very, very short. They're all on their own. You can narrow them down to a handful of dungeons and a bit of world mappiness. But there's there's obviously a lot more to it than that. But I'm talking if you like beeline through the game, I guess. So I pretty much the exact same thing. Is I wish they could just be more of it and more plot and more, even if it was more time to spend on making Amaranth a worthwhile, or like with more backstory and things like that. Like any more Final Fantasy IX, yeah, great.
Buggy?
I don't know. I'm in agreement. I feel like Amaranth deserved more. I think a lot of side characters, they were so well designed and well created that they deserved more. Like I wanted to see more of a lot of them, but also the ending was a little sloppy in some places. They just need to they just need to trim it up and kind of, I felt like they needed to figure it out a little bit towards the end. It was kind of getting like Nomura, like really, usually at the end of Final Fantasies, kind of like time compression, Final Fantasy VIII weirdness and stuff. But I feel like they needed to kind of like figure that out a little bit. But other than that, yeah.
I'll agree to that. And that's kind of back what I was saying about Necron, where it felt like maybe there was a little too much homages. Maybe that was an homage to the Cloud of Darkness from Final Fantasy III, and maybe just step back and think, well, even if it is, you know, kind of a love letter to that, is that the best idea? Maybe we could do something different with this ending.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I think we're all in agreement. We know how we want it. So now we're gonna go and ask the audience. Well, no, the audience can ask us the questions. So firstly, we've actually had quite a few questions from Goose this evening, and his first one was, what is everyone's favourite mini game?
Drunken Chocobo Hot and Cold. I love Chocobo Hot and Cold. I think it's a lot of fun.
As much frustration as it's caused me over the years getting it 100%, which I still try and do every playthrough, the very second minigame you encounter of sword fighting blank at the start. I don't know, I'd definitely say I prefer to play Chocobo Hot and Cold throughout the game. Like, if you had to do the sword fight in lieu of Chocobo Hot and Cold, no thank you. But in my, like, it's such a, like, iconic moment in my childhood, that first minigame of, and so satisfying to get 100 nobles impressed or whatever.
Yeah. Cool. Ness?
This is a terrible order, because it's gonna seem like I'm just ripping off Tomatoborris here. But yeah, the Chocobo Hot and Cold, obviously, and the Chocographs especially, I touched on earlier. I really like the sword fighting as well. I cannot play Final Fantasy IX without getting 100 and 100 and Brahmin pressed. I have to do it every time. And I would love, here's something to change. I would love if you could go around with Tantalus doing more like sword fighting and plays throughout the game. I think that would be an interesting mini game.
That's a new one. And the next question we have is another one from Goose about your favorite ATE. Does anyone have an ATE that stands out to them most?
I'll say mine. There's one that is insanely hard to get. So at one point, you have an ATE where Quina eats some Gishal pickles, or however you pronounce them. And if you have less than 50 gil, you get an additional ATE in which Baku makes Zidane pay for them.
Nice.
Oddly enough, my favourite ATE is also about the Gishal pickle. And, of course, Steiner discovering his love of Gishal pickles.
I love that too.
And the subsequent scene later on you get with the tall and short soldiers, where they sneak through South Gate using the smell of pickles to cover up any intention of searching their bags. Those.
I do like in that Steiner ATE, he's like, it's not bad. And the vendor's like, I've never seen anyone eat one all at once.
Yeah.
Buggy?
I like all the ATEs in Maiden Sorry. I liked all of them. I think just because of like Moogle things. Honestly, but I like all of them. Like, I don't know. I like how you're able to like make different particular choices and stuff like that. And I don't know. I thought it was a lot of fun. I also like any type of ATE where Ruby is in it and like like Ruby talking to any member of Tantalus. I don't know. I really like Ruby for some reason.
Ruby's great.
Yeah, she's such a good character.
I was actually tempted to say Lowell, but it reoccurred to me that he's not in an ATB, but more in sequences you've run into. And he's the fellow in Limblum who's the star of Moogle Wannabe 2.
Oh, right.
And then he escapes from his rabid mob of fans by dressing as a giant Moogle. But then you can go into the painters afterwards, and Lowell's like being really obnoxious to his like quite creative painter buddy, and eventually he moves to Ruby's theatre and is a bit up himself about how lowly a theatre this is for him. And yeah, he's a great character, but I don't think he's in actually any ATEs.
I didn't know he ended up in Ruby's. I think that's the part I must have missed. I didn't know that. The next question we've got is from Look Who's Barton, maybe? Maybe you want to pronounce it that way?
It's Fatagan.
Would you rather get tickets to Final Fantasy VI's opera or Final Fantasy IX's play? Good question.
That's not a fair question.
That is tough.
Is it 9? Okay, if I get tickets to 9's play, is it going to be the play that was in the game where Steiner's just standing there not knowing what the hell he's doing and he's like, "Princess!" And like, if it's that show, then absolutely I'm going to pay for that ticket.
But you have to consider, if it is that show, then the Final Fantasy VI one is the one with Celeste.
And
True.
And who intervenes in the greatest of octopus royalty? I'm going to have to pick the Final Fantasy VI opera because of Honorable Octopus, I think.
I agreed. Honestly, if every play / opera could end with a big octopus fighting all the cast members, I'd be a bigger fan of theater.
Opera would be so much more popular.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know for myself, which I'd probably want to see an octopus. Yeah, I'd want to see that one. I'll go for 6 as well. LadyBuggy, is there one moment in the game that makes you still go, This is why I love this game so much? That was asked by Goose.
Oh man. Oh man. There's so much. Okay, I don't know why, but I love I have two things. I love the beginning when the theater ship crashes into the evil forest. I think that is just the coolest FMV. I love that. And I don't know. I think it's just my nostalgia kicks in. I love the music, but also at the end, I mean, and the end is going to get you crying and super emotional, but Vivi and I don't know spoilies or anything, but Vivi at the end just makes me like, I don't know. So I think, I don't know. And I feel like, cause I have a huge theater background. So like whenever I see like the theater ship in the beginning and stuff like that, I tend to just really love that and really connect to that. So I don't know.
That's a nice answer.
Yeah.
Dupe has asked, do you admit to ever in your life having not given Stiltskin Gil every time? That's aimed at anyone.
I won't admit to that. I gave him all my Gil every time.
He's so small and cute. You have to give him Gil.
The first time I played it, I didn't. I don't think, because I don't think the Play Online guide mentions about that. It just says go online to find out more about Stiltskin.
Yeah. I don't think I had enough money or every time. Sometimes I did. Suit has asked, would any one of you complete the 1000 jump rope minigame?
No. I'm just like, no. Listen, if the developers of the game have a hard time finishing that, no, man. No, thank you. I can't sit there for long periods of time and try that.
I think I tried in my last playthrough and I got to 73. And
oh, wow.
That took so long. No. Just no.
Do you know how long it would take?
Well, that's just the thing. There is a perfect game out there where if you have to do it 3 times and get over 10 to unlock a certain Mognet letter, which if you consider that 100%. And supposedly, yes, if you do it perfectly, you'd have to do it first go. So basically save scum it.
I never have. I maybe got to 20 jumps, but then I'm not good at rhythm stuff, and then it also changes, and then I'm like, nah, fam, I'm good.
I honestly don't think I ever even tried it. I just gave up immediately. Goose has asked a question. Amaranth, any redeeming part to him? Chat agrees he's pretty useless and boring.
I think I see he's actually the counterpart to Zidane in, if you look at the equipment loadouts and the kind of the way it's laid out, you're given 2 relatively offensive casters with light gear. You're given 2 defensive casters with light gear. You're given 2 heavy attackers with a hard armor, and then you're given Zidane and Amaranth, who, unfortunately, because you've got Zidane in your party, like literally 99% of the time, yeah, he does come off as a bit weak, but he does have his place, and that his backstory scene with Zidane in Trino is relatively enjoyable.
I think he's kind of confusing. He confuses me a little bit because it's like he's a grown man and he has his own. He's a grown man. He's got his own stuff. Allegedly, he's got his own stuff going on. Like he's his own type of thief. But I don't understand where they were going with his character in a sense. I don't understand why he kind of really looks up to Zidane in a weird way. Like he's so connected to Zidane, and I don't know why. I can't make that connection. And I feel like he deserved more. Like he deserved more added.
He definitely could do with more. He does have a couple of interesting moments with Freya as well, if I recall, where they don't realize they're part of the same party, but then they actually start to talk because they're both they're 2 of the 3 adults in the entire kind of roster. So they do actually talk to each other in a couple of moments. I think Amaranth's thing is basically he's pretty simple-minded. He's got the pursuit of, he only cares about worthy fights, basically. Zidane bests him using cunning or whatever, and that leads Amaranth on a bit of a revengey, I need to understand you kind of mission.
Weird.
Yeah, despite being, I think if you look in the guide, he's more than twice Zidane's age, or something like that. Like, you know, like he should have learned these life lessons by then, but he needed a teenage thief to teach him the good old ways.
I mean, I hate his story. I honestly think he did not add anything significant to the game, in my opinion. But he's got a good kit. I mean, the classic kind of monk / ninja abilities. I take him into Olivert every time. He's just good when you can't use magic.
Yeah, he's not a bad attacker. No.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Sue has asked, what was your end expectation of Kuja, except that he would be the final boss? I guess he's asking what alternatives.
I expected, when I first played it, instead of Necron, I expected Kuja to turn into basically, as you've seen with 7 and 8 before, you see them turn into an even more horrendously powerful giant monster than they were before. Yeah, I was expecting that. Oh yeah, and 6 in 5 as well. In fact, so many Final Fantasies that I expected that.
Yes.
It's the same for me. I really expected Kuja to be the last boss when I first played it. And honestly, I don't think the game story would lose anything if he was. I mean, if you cut out the entire Necron section and the last boss was Trans Kuja, what would you lose?
They'd need to put in... I mean, I'm not saying it's rightfully explained by Necron, but they would still need to put in the explanation for him blowing up the crystal and then the party just magically appearing outside, which he is actually, I believe, responsible for them being magically teleported them outside after they best Kuja. No, Necron, on the Hill of Despair, or wherever that place is called.
Actually, I think it's Kuja who teleports him, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I mean. it would make a bit less sense for him to. You just beat him. If you chop out the Necron section,
I see.
You beat Kuja down. He goes a bit berserk, destroys the crystal, and then suddenly goes, "Wait, I really shouldn't have done that. I'll teleport you guys out." And at least with Necron, there's a that's what they're overcoming. This is their hope, and it's teaching Kuja the lesson that's hammered into you throughout the game.
Great. Buggy, any extra words on that, or in agreement?
I'm in agreement. That's pretty. Yeah, it's pretty. Yeah, I'm in agreement.
Cool. We've got a question from Kale. Alexander or Bahamut? Bahamut.
Oh.
For what? President? I go with the giant robotic castle any day.
Same. Alexander.
1000%.
Wow,
Why would you
was
choose a
easy.
dragon? But you can't summon Alexander in the game, so I guess Bahamut's got that over him.
But also, by that token, Alexander has the coolest summoning animation in the game.
Yeah, that was awesome. That was awesome. Oh.
Everyone's pretty excited about that one. Yeah, okay, we're all in agreement. So, Duke Possessed, what's your take on the absolute obscurity of the Nero family side quest on Disc 4? Nero, the Nero family. Who are the Nero family?
Those are those claw people, right?
They the ones that are like...
Yeah, there's Nero, Zero, and...
Oh, do you mean Benero? I don't think that's... or is that... Isn't there a very obscure scene you can unlock on Disc 4 in the Trino auction house, provided you've done... And some fans only very... And I say recently found out, I mean like in recent years. And it's some weird throwaway scene because there's another part that ties to the fact that Kuja is operating off, was it the king's money? Or so, there's a family in Trino called the Kings, and they're involved in that as well. I'm somewhat thinking that. Oh no, they're talking about the Benero Zenero thing. Never mind me. Yeah.
Well, what is your take on the obscurity of the Benero Zenero side quest? What's the side quest?
Obscure for a reason. Let it lay buried.
Okay. In several
Ravioli.
Yeah.
Give me the formuoli.
You gain a protection ring out of it. You need to go back to see them after random points in Memoria.
And you need to do so. If you go too far in Memoria, you will skip the arbitrary point. And you need to, every X amount, you need to go back and unlock a little bit more dialogue. And that was also very recently discovered.
I'll put it this way. I would give that up to keep Amaranth.
Okay. Well, that's all the questions that we've got from chat at the minute. If anybody else in chat right now would like to throw anything, it doesn't have to be in the Platy Points section. You can just throw it in the chat and I'll read it. Any of you guys on the guest panel got anything that you feel we haven't covered? Any extra bits? Oh, hold on, Kale's just said anything. I don't have a good way to word this, but just generally, feelings on Zorn and Thorn as characters?
Yes. That's a good question, Kale. I feel like I'm going to be in the vast minority here, but I really like Zorn and Thorn. Their goal was to piss you off. 100% accomplished. Like, from the way they talk to their sneaky little gesturings all around, I just hated them the entire time, and I liked that they made me not like them, I guess, if that makes any sense. And then they turned into a big virus zombie.
I actually remember enjoying their dialogue when I was a kid, because I really liked reading the alternate ways of saying things, and I found that quite amusing. It didn't take many playthroughs for me to start just mashing X through all of the dialogue and it's on for come on. And I think I still do that in their scenes to this day.
I will also say, great theme song for them, Gestures on the Moon.
X. I like them. I think they're such good villains. Like they're, like y'all said, like they're great villains and they make you mad and they're supposed to, but they're also weirdly endearing and they're very there's like a huge theater aspect to them and like the way that they interact with each other, and they're just like, I don't know, they're just the perfect evil jesters. And
I will add on that, just reminded me, the ritual that they perform on Garnet / Aiko, super creepy moment in the game.
Yeah, really creepy.
Genuinely creepy.
Yeah.
I was going to actually say that myself.
On a completely different, it's going back to that theatre thing that you mentioned. It does occur to me that literally all of the Kuja and Garland, they're all very, very theatrical people. Like, true. Garland has his moment where he decides he's talking to literally no one. He's riding a magical airship that transports through souls through dimensions, and he's literally talking to himself. And I think he uses the phrase, "Oh, you'll get yours, Kuja. I don't think I've forgotten about you, Zidane." It's like, who talks like that? And then Kuja also has several similar moments where he's just kind of musing to himself. "Oh, I'll catch my canary."
They're all very Shakespearean.
Yeah. Well, Lord Avon, I believe, is obviously a big homage to Shakespeare, clearly.
Yep.
So yeah, big proponent of the theatrical stuff there.
Yeah.
Suits just asked the question, what do you think that some characters' names make a return, like Garland?
Like, you want us to list all the names that return?
Possibly.
I mean, Garland, a lot of people don't know this, but or who haven't played the older games, but Garland was actually, and that's another good point for the other thing, Garland was the first boss you fight in Final Fantasy 1. And that's a kind of another example of the boss out of nowhere kind of thing from Necron. Is Garland actually ends up being the big bad for Final Fantasy 1, turning into a huge monster at the end. And you're like, I haven't thought about him in 40 hours.
Kale's also just said, let's talk about Sid. The name Sid is Sid in every single Final Fantasy?
3, I believe, was his first appearance officially, and he's always had the engineer role pretty firmly locked in there. I'd say 8 would be the biggest exception to that rule.
I was gonna say weirdest Sid, probably 8.
Robin Williams Sid.
Yeah, a lot of the characters in 8 are very. I don't refer to many of them as stable, to be honest. NPCs or main characters.
Everyone in chat saying Biggs and Wedge as well. Yeah,
Biggs and Wedge, yeah.
I'd say there's a nice obscure one with Doga and Une.
Yeah, definitely. Especially in Final Fantasy 9, you get little nods to them.
So there's 2 specific items you can grab from the Trino auction house: Doga's artifact and Une's mirror, or Une's mirror. If you go to the Black Mage villages, sonograph, what gramophone, with those items, it will actually play the theme Doga and Une from Final Fantasy 3. Nice little cameo there.
Boko is another one that gets referenced in this game. I know Tomato's a fan.
The best chocobo in the game.
Which that's a reference to Final Fantasy V's main protagonist, Bart's or Butts, chocobo.
I thought you were going to refer to the protagonist of Final Fantasy V as the chocobo for a moment there, which...
I mean, it could be argued.
Most important character.
You have to go through 30 hours of gameplay just to see him again.
You can visit him in the cave.
Stereotypical Moogle names, too.
True. Mog.
Yeah.
Mog.
Yep.
Well, as well as the it's like little throwbacks. I think it's Freya's ultimate weapon is Kane's lance, which Kane is the famous dragoon from Final Fantasy IV. You know,
not the first one though. The first dragoon was in Final Fantasy II.
Is it Leon technically or something? One of those side characters that joins you?
It is one of the side characters. Yeah, I can't recall his name. I think it's Richard.
Cecil said Richard in chat.
Yeah.
That's such a standard name.
I'm the greatest dragon knight of them all. My name, Richard. You can call me Dick.
Well, in that regard, I always thought 4 had the more ridiculous, as you open up as the fearsome Dark Knight Cecil. Well, I don't know who was in charge of that naming, but that always sat very oddly with me.
Is that how you say it? Cecil?
Cecil?
Cecil? I don't know.
Either way, it's a great name for a Dark Knight.
Cerulean Knight has written, I think Final Fantasy IX's chocobos are the ones that I cared most about and loved. How do you guys feel about that? Because, yeah, like, the chocobos through the series, they do sort of become more integrated in some and less in others. Do you think that they're the best ones of the series?
I'd say Choco, and from the Chocobo Hot and Cold obviously has its own little story, which is quite a nice little story. The only other thing I can think of would be 7, where you kind of grow more attached, especially when you were younger, you'd grow more attached to your chocobos that you raised. You'd finally made S rank because you didn't know how to feed them 500 Silky screens or whatever. Yeah, those are probably, I'd kind of agree that they, as chocobo stories go, that makes me care the most.
I'd agree. I think 7 had my favorite, even though they weren't named. They didn't really have a personality. There was just you breed your own chocobo farm, basically. That should be a spin-off game, Chocobo Farm.
Chocobo farming, yeah. That could actually make so much money now that farming sims are such a big thing. Oh, right. Square Enix!
You're welcome, Square. That one's for free.
Let's go.
We got another question from Dupe. The best Moogle outside of Artemision and Stiltskin? Anyone remember any other the Moogles in that one?
You know the married couple in Gizmaluke's Grotto?
That's what
they were so cute, and the little Moogle babies when you go back to Gizmaluke's Grotto, they're like running around. That was adorable. That was the greatest.
That was great. I especially like how he's like, I'm trapped in here, and then you're like, I have Scooby snacks, and then he just rips the bell off.
He's Koopo for Koopo nuts.
Yeah.
That's cute.
Yeah. Okay, everyone's now going insane about this Chocobo side game that should be made. Cool. We've got one. We're on to a winner. So I think we're done for tonight, guys. If anybody's got anything else to say, you're welcome to speak now. Otherwise, I will ask you one by one to tell us what your stream schedule is. Ness doesn't stream, just for you guys that don't know, Ness doesn't stream. But Buggy, when are you streaming and what are you streaming at the minute?
Oh man, I stream a lot of games. So actually tonight I'm doing Vodka and Skies of Arcadia, and I usually get really drunk. You guys, this is for mature audiences. I get drunk and stuff like that. I'm gonna be in a pirate costume tonight, and then on Friday it's gonna be Tea with Lemon in Final Fantasy VII, and then Late with Final Fantasy VIII. And then Saturday is Martini and Nino Kuni. Sunday is Visual Novel Sunday, and that's with Boba and Danganronpa. And yeah.
Well, see, you could change your FFA one because you have a little bit of a rhyming scheme. You could do drinking rum and playing dumb.
It's basically what I do. So, I mean, just like my overall rhyming scheme. But yeah, it's usually at 5 p.m. PST, except for Visual Novel Sundays. That's at 1 p.m.
Cool. And Tomato, what about yourself?
Hard to stick to a schedule. Pretty regular Saturdays and Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I've been trying to stream Monster Hunter World at the moment. It's going well, up and down frame rates, but that's probably what I'll be streaming next.
And at some point, will you do modded Hades, maybe?
I've been trying, but he's very tough, and the thing I want to do with Final Fantasy IX, possibly more than modded Hades, next is the level 1 run 0 EXP. Yeah, so there'll be that on the table sometime this year, I imagine.
And you do have a podcast yourself, don't you?
Yeah, I voice act on a podcast. It's called Blake Sky, Private Eye. And it is a story-driven noir-type podcast. I play one of the villains. And check that out. We put out 2 episodes a month. One is the actual narrative, and the other one is kind of like a listener mailbag in which we just goof around for an hour and answer your questions.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for being here in chat today, and thank you to my guest speakers, LadyBuggy, Nessrocker and Tomatoborris. I really appreciate all of you being here, and I appreciate you guys taking part. The next Final Fantasy podcast will be a month away. If anybody is interested in talking with us, being one of the guest speakers on a future podcast, please get in contact with me. You can whisper to me on Twitch, you can send me a DM on Discord, Twitter, all the places. Just send me a message and I'll add you to the list. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you guys for being our guests. Let's say bye to everybody. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
Goodbye.